Hello my friends, how are you doing? Welcome to the Blender interface. If this is the first time you've opened Blender, you should be seeing something very similar to this. This first window that opens in front of the interface is called Quick Setup. This window offers some shortcut options and themes related to Blender's interface and usability. This window appears the first time we open Blender, and after we click this Next button, it no longer appears. But if you happen to want to change any of these settings, all of these options can also be found in Blender Preferences window. For this crash course, we will leave all these settings with the default options, and we will click Next. When we do that, we will come across the splash screen, which is this window that will open every time you open Blender. Here, we will be able to choose to open Blender with some specific settings and access some links. But if we just want to start working, we just have to click anywhere outside this window and it will close. And then we will see the full interface. Blender's interface is completely customizable and can be configured with numerous components. In this course, we will focus only on the components of the standard interface, which is this one we are seeing. As we can see, the interface is divided into some large blocks by these divisions. Each of these divisions is called an area. And the content that exists within each area is called editor. The standard Blender interface comes with 4 main editors. The 3D view, which is where we view and interact with the objects in the scene. The timeline, which is a timeline similar to the progress bar of any video software. The outliner, which is basically an organized list of all objects in the scene, and the Properties editor, which allows us to view and edit various properties of scene elements that are divided into categories through this system of tabs. In addition to these editors, we still find here at the top some common software menus, such as File, Edit, and Help, and this system of tabs that show a few different interface configurations geared towards specific steps of the work process, such as Texture Paint and Animation. But as it's also possible to perform all these steps of the scene creation process using just the initial interface configuration, in this crash course, we will only use the Layout tab, which is the default interface configuration of Blender. And with that, we conclude this brief presentation of the Blender interface. Once you know the basic components of the interface, the first thing you should study when learning about a 3D software is the navigation controls of the three-dimensional environment. And the main navigation controls of the 3D environment are Zoom, Pan, and Orbit. There are many ways to use these commands, but we will get right to the 2 most accessible and important, which are the 3D view navigation icons located here in the upper right corner of the 3D view, and the shortcuts. Let's start with the zoom. The zoom command is for zooming in and out of the scene elements. If we want to use the navigation icon, just click this magnifying glass icon, keep the button pressed and drag up to zoom in and down to zoom out. The shortcut to the zoom is the mouse scroll. Just spin forwards to zoom in and backwards to zoom out. The pan command is for moving the screen sideways, up and down. To use this command through the icons, just click the hand icon here in the corner of the 3D view, keep the mouse button pressed and drag in the desired direction. And to pan using shortcuts, just hold down the Shift key and the middle mouse button and drag in the desired direction. And finally, we have the orbit command. This command is to rotate the 3D view so that we can see the 3D environment from other angles. To use the orbit through the icons, just click on this colorful icon and drag. Or simply hold down the middle mouse button and drag on the desired direction. In addition to being able to rotate using this navigation icon, we can click on each of these small colored circles to position the viewpoint precisely on the axis-specific views, such as top, right, front, and so on. And now, to finish, let's take a look at this button here. This button is used to toggle the 3D view between perspective mode and orthographic mode. The orthographic mode shows the 3D environment without the natural distortion we see in the real-world environment that makes objects appear smaller as they move away from the viewer. And although this view is unnatural and may seem a bit odd, it can be quite useful in some steps of the work. Now that we have started to see the first Blender shortcuts, it is important that you pay close attention to how it works. All Blender shortcuts are sensitive to the editor the cursor is on. This means that the shortcut will only work if you have the cursor over the editor you want to use the shortcut. For example, we just saw the navigation shortcuts. We saw that if we have the cursor over the 3D view, we can rotate the mouse scroll to zoom in and out of the scene. However, if we place the cursor over the timeline and spin the scroll, we will see that the zoom will be given in the timeline itself, not in the 3D view. And if we hover over the Properties editor and scroll, we will see that nothing will happen, because right now there is nothing to scroll here. So, whenever you use a shortcut, be careful so that the cursor is over the editor you want the shortcut to work, okay? For you to be able to do any work on a 3D software, it's crucial to know how to comfortably navigate the 3D environment. So, make sure you memorize these shortcuts. We will see how to select and transform objects. And to do that, we can use the default Blender scene. By now, you may have noticed that when you open Blender or create a new file by going to File, New, General, Blender creates a scene that comes with these three objects. In the center we see a cube, which is a geometry. In addition, we have this point, which is a light, and this pyramid-shaped object, that is a camera. And since the default scene comes with these initial objects, we can use it to see how to select and transform objects. If we look here on the left side of the 3D view, we will see this bar with some buttons. This is the 3D View toolbar. And although the icons are very intuitive and easy to identify, if you want, you can position the cursor on the right edge of it and When the cursor takes on this format, you can click and drag to the right. When you do that, at first you will see that the buttons are organized into two columns. And if you drag further, you will see now that the buttons now display the two names next to the icons. As I said before, these icons are easy to identify. But when we are learning how to use the software, it may be a good idea to make the names visible to make them easier to identify. As we can see here, the first button is called Select Box. If we leave this button pressed, we can see that there are other selection tool options. But the selection box will be enough for everything we will need to do on this course. When this tool is active, we can click on any object to select it, or click and drag to create a selection window to select everything within it. If we click anywhere empty of the 3D view, we will deselect everything that is selected. And if we want to select more than one object, just select the first, and then, while holding down the Shift key, click on the object we want to add to the selection. Also, a quick way to clear the selection is by using the Alt-A shortcut. And a quick way to select everything is simply to press the A key. And lastly, another quick and efficient way to select objects is simply to click on the object name here in the outliner. Now, let's take a look at how to transform the objects in the scene. And by transform, I mean moving, rotating, and scaling the objects. And to perform these operations, we will use these tools here from the toolbar. Let's start with the Move tool. When we have one of these tools active, we can also select the objects by simply clicking on them. And when we select one or more objects, we will see that a colored icon appears in the 3D view. This icon can be called Transform Gizmo or Manipulator. The Move tool manipulator consists of these 3 arrows and these 3 squares. Each of these arrows correspond to one of the axes of the 3-dimensional environment. The red arrow corresponds to the x-axis, the green arrow corresponds to the y-axis, and the blue arrow corresponds to the z-axis. If we click on any of these arrows and drag, the object will be moved only on the axis in question. So, if I click and drag on the red arrow, I move the object only on the x-axis. Clicking and dragging on the green arrow moves the object only on the y-axis. And if I click the blue arrow, I move the object only on the z-axis. These squares that exist between the arrows allow us to move the object in only 2 axes, excluding the axis of the corresponding color. So, if I click on this blue square, the tool excludes the z-axis and moves the object only on the x and y-axis. If I click on this green square, I move the object only on the x and z-axis. And if I click this red square, I move the object along the z and y-axis. And if I have the Move tool active and click and drag anywhere empty on the screen, I move the object perpendicular to the screen. Now let's take a look at the Rotate tool. When the Rotate tool is active, we can see these 4 arcs over the selected object. This is the rotation manipulator. Each arc also corresponds to an axis of the three-dimensional environment. And if we click and drag on one of them, we rotate the object only on that axis. That is, if I click and drag on the red axis, I rotate the object only on the x-axis. If I click and drag on the green axis, I rotate the object only on the y-axis. And if I click and drag on the blue axis, I rotate the object only on the z-axis. And if I click and drag on this white arc or rotate outside it, I rotate the object perpendicular to the screen. And finally, if I click and drag inside that arc without clicking on any of the other arcs, I rotate the object freely, as if clicking and dragging a ball. Now, before using the Scale tool, I will use the Ctrl+Z shortcut to go back a few steps until the box returns to the starting position. By default, Blender is set up to save up to 32 steps in history. Which means if we use Ctrl+Z, we can go back up to 32 commands. Now let's take a look at the Scale tool. The Scale manipulation icon is very similar to the Move tool manipulation icon. We have these edges to scale the objects one axis at a time. We have these squares to scale the objects in 2 axes at a time. And if we click anywhere else, we scale the objects on the 3 axes at the same time. And finally, we have the Transform tool. This tool is nothing more than all the other ones mixed. When this tool is active, we see all manipulators at the same time. So we can move, rotate, and scale the objects using just one tool. This can be a bit confusing in some situations, but it can also be quite versatile. Finally, I will activate the Select Box tool once again to show how we can use the transform commands using some basic shortcuts. So, even though I don't have any transform tools active, I can move the selected object by pressing the G key for grab, I can rotate the object using the R key for rotate, and I can scale the object by using the S key for scale. And these were the main selection and transformation commands. Now that you have the basics of navigating, selecting, and transforming objects, let's take a look at how to create and delete objects from the scene. For that, we can start with a standard Blender scene. And we can take advantage that this scene comes with 3 objects, a cube, a light, and a camera, and see how to delete the objects. Deleting an object in Blender is as simple as deleting an object in any other software. Just select it and hit the delete key. But there is another shortcut that also may be interesting to know, not because you will necessarily use it, but because you may bump into it unintentionally, and it's interesting that you understand what's happening. If I select another object and hit the X key on the keyboard, Blender also deletes the object. But when we use the X key, instead of deleting the object directly, it opens this window asking if we really want to delete the object. And if we hit delete, the object is deleted normally. And finally, another way to delete objects from the scene is to right-click the object name here in the outliner and click Delete. Now let's take a look at how we can create new objects in Blender. To create objects, we will access the Add menu, which we'll find here at the top of the 3D view. In this menu, we will find several submenus divided by categories. Within each of these submenus, we will find all the objects that are available for each category. In the Mesh submenu, we will find all the geometries that can be created. In the Light submenu, we will see all the kinds of lights that can be created, and so on. Besides being able to access the Creation menu through the top of the 3D view, we can also use the Shift-A shortcut. With the cursor over the 3D view, we can press the Shift-A shortcut to display the Object Creation menu in this floating format. In this lesson, we will focus on how to create geometries, and for that, we will use the Mesh submenu. As you can see, there are several options of primitive geometries that can be created. If we click on Cube, for example, we will see that a cube will be created in the middle of the 3D view. In fact, the object is not necessarily created in the middle of the 3D view. It is created wherever the 3D cursor of the scene is. The 3D cursor is this 3-axis icon with this dashed circle. When we create a new object, it is created where this icon is. And to reposition the 3D cursor, just hold the Shift key and right-click anywhere in the 3D view. So, if I hold Shift and right-click to position the cursor here, for example, open the Creation menu with the Shift-A shortcut and click Mesh, Cube, we will see that the new cube will be created in this new position. And if you want the 3D cursor to return to the center of the scene, just use the Shift-C shortcut. Now, I will use the Shift and right mouse click to position the 3D cursor in a free place of the 3D view. And I will use the Shift-A shortcut and click Mesh, UV Sphere. And now I will talk about an important aspect of Blender commands. Several Blender commands have properties that can be edited, and some of these properties can only be edited immediately after we perform the command in question. When we create an object, for example, we can edit some initial properties of that object. And these properties can be found in this panel down here, which we can open if we click on it. In the case of object creation, right after we create a certain object, we can edit some initial properties of it here in this panel. These properties will vary from object to object. In the case of the sphere, for example, we can edit the number of segments, which corresponds to the vertical edges of the object, the number of rings, which corresponds to the horizontal edges, and the radius, which corresponds to the size. But be aware of the following. We can only edit these parameters immediately after the creation of the object. If we perform any other command, these properties disappear, and the panel displays the properties of the last command that was given. So, if I activate the Rotate tool and click and rotate the sphere, we will see that this panel will no longer display the initial properties of the sphere, and will now display the properties of the rotation we just made. And these are the basic concepts of object creation. What I recommend you do now is position the 3D cursor on different parts of the 3D view and create at least one of each of these mesh menu initial geometries and explore the initial properties of each one a bit. We will begin to see how we can transform a basic geometry of Blender into custom objects through what we call polygonal modeling. We already saw that when we select an object in Blender, at first we can move, rotate, and scale the object freely. We can interact in this way directly with the object when it is in the interaction mode called Object Mode. If we have a geometry selected and look here in the upper left corner of the 3D view, we will see this menu here. This is the Interaction Mode menu, and it allows us to choose the interaction mode of the object. The default mode is the Object Mode, which allows one to interact with the object as a whole by freely selecting and transforming it. But if we open this menu, we will see other interaction modes. And if we are with a geometry selected and want to edit the shape of the object with polygonal modeling tools, we will enable the Edit mode here. In this lesson, we will know the structural components of the object, and we will see how to select and manipulate these components. If we look here next to the Interaction Mode menu, we will see 3 buttons. These buttons allow us to choose which structural components of the geometry we can select. There are 3 structural components in a geometry: vertices, edges, and faces. If we have the vertex component active here and the box selection tool active here in the toolbar, we can select the vertices of the object. And, at first, the way to select these components is the same as the way you select objects in Object Mode. We can click on each vertex individually to select them. We can add new vertex to the selection by holding down the Shift key. We can click on a free place in the 3D view to clear the selection. And we can create selection windows to select vertex groups. The next structural component is Edge, which can be activated on this button here. When it is active, we can use the same selection commands to select the edges of the model. And finally, we can enable Face Selection Mode up here to use the selection commands to select the entire faces of the model. And when we have any component or group of structural components selected, we can use the transform tools to move, rotate, and scale this selection. This way, we can start editing the shape of the initial model. Note now an important aspect about how objects are edited. When we have an object in edit mode, the selection, move, rotate, and scale tools will only work for the components of the object that is selected. If we try to select any other object, like the camera or the light, we will see that we just can't do it. So, in order for us to be able to select the other objects in the scene again, we must exit the Edit mode by going to the Interaction Mode menu and clicking Object Mode. With this, we will see that we can now select the other objects normally. Now, we will select and delete this initial cube from the scene. And I will create a UV sphere so I can show some more selection commands. For that, I will press the Shift-A shortcut, and in the Mesh submenu, I will click on UV Sphere. Now, I will enter the edit mode of this object. Only this time, I will use a shortcut for this. And the shortcut to enter the edit mode of the selected geometry is the Tab key. Alright, now I will show you how we can quickly select entire loops of vertices, edges, and faces. To select an entire loop, just hold down the Alt key and click on an edge. These will work both for the vertex selection mode, the edge selection mode, and even for the face selection mode. But for the face selection mode, the direction of the selected loop will depend on where you click on the face. If you click with the Alt key pressed closer to the vertical edges, that is, around here or here, it will select the horizontal loop. And if you click closer to the horizontal edges, around here or here, it will select the vertical loop. And finally, if you want to select multiple loops, just combine the shortcut to select loops with the shortcut to add more components to the selection. That is, Shift and Alt. So, if I keep the Shift and the Alt keys pressed, I can go by clicking and adding new loops to the selection. And these are Blender's main edit mode selection commands. In this lesson, we will see how to create and remove edges and faces of an object. For that, we can use the initial cube of the default Blender scene. So, we can select it and enter the Edit mode by going to the Interaction Mode menu up here. Let's start by looking at how to delete and create new faces. To delete a face, just activate the Face Selection mode up here, select the face to be deleted, and hit the Delete key. When we do this, we will see this menu with various options to erase the geometry components. Some of these options are more advanced and can be a bit confusing. Also, for us to remove a face, we will also choose this Faces option here. So, after selecting a face, just click Delete Faces. If we want to close this hole now, we will need to select all the vertices that surround this hole. To do this, we can activate the Edge or Vertex Selection mode up here. And we can use either of these two because in the end, the whole border will be selected in the same way. For this time, I will activate the Vertex Selection mode and click on any of these edges with the Alt key pressed to select the entire loop. Once all the vertices of the hole are selected, we can go to the Vertex menu up here. Here we will find some vertex-specific tools. And if I use the New Edge Faces from Vertices command, it will close the hole with a new face. The shortcut to this command is the F key. So, if I enable the Face Selection mode, select a face and delete it, then activate the Vertex or the Edge on Selection mode, and select the entire border with the Alt key, I just have to press the F key to close this hole with a new face. Now let's take a look at how to create and remove the edges of the model. When we enter the Edit mode, we can see here on the left of the 3D view that the tools on the toolbar change. The toolbar always displays the tools corresponding to the interaction mode in which the object is. As we have also seen, we can move the cursor over the right corner of the toolbar and click and drag right until we see the names of the buttons. One of the modeling tools we will find here is the Loop Cut tool. If we enable this tool, we will see that when we position the cursor over an edge of the model, it will display a yellow loop perpendicular to the edge in question. And if we click, this edge loop will actually be created in the model. And if instead of simply clicking, we click and drag, we can define the starting position of this loop. As we have also seen, if we click this panel down here immediately after using a certain command, we can configure some properties of that command. And in the case of the Loop Cut tool, two interesting parameters are the number of cuts and the factor parameter, which allows you to determine the starting position of the loop. But remember that after you perform any other command, you will no longer be able to edit these loop cut properties. So, for example, if I activate the Scale tool and scale this selection, the properties of this panel will become the properties of the Scale command, not the loop cut. Now, let's see how to remove the edges of the model. The simplest way to remove an edge from a model is to select it with the Select Box tool and using the Ctrl-Delete shortcut. And if we want to erase an entire loop of edges, just select the loop with the Alt key pressed and use the Ctrl-Delete shortcut. In this lesson, we will get to know some of Blender's main polygonal modeling tools. Blender has several modeling tools that allow us to create almost any type of object. And although we will not address all of them in this course, we will see that even with a few tools, it's possible to create very interesting projects. To show these tools, I will delete the initial cube of the scene, and I will create a sphere by using the Shift-A shortcut, going to the Mesh submenu, and by clicking on UV Sphere. And now I'm going to enter the Object Edit mode by going to the Interaction Mode menu up here. Very well. So we can start to explore the tools. I will click on the corner of the toolbar here on the right and drag to the center of the 3D view, so we can see the names of each button. The tools icons have a very good design, and when you know each of them, you can easily identify each tool by just looking at the icon. But while we are learning, it may be a good idea to make the names visible until we get used to the icons. In this lesson, we will focus on these first 3 buttons of the Toolbar's Polygonal Modeling Tools group: the Extrude, the Inset, and the Bevel. So, let's start by activating the Extrude tool. Extrude is a tool that acts on the faces of the object. Then, we can also activate the Face Selection mode up here. Now, if we select a face and we have the Extrude Region tool active, we will see a plus icon in front of the face. If we click on this icon and drag inside, we create a negative extrusion. That is, Blender pushes the polygon inward, creating new polygons that connect the polygons in question to the rest of the geometry. And if we select a polygon and click on the plus icon and drag it out, we create a positive extrusion. Right after using the extrude, we can see that besides the plus icon, you can see an arrow in front of the face. If we click and drag on this arrow, we can reposition the polygon, adjust the size of the extrusion. And if we click on the plus icon again, we create a new extrusion with new polygons. You can also use the extrude with multiple polygons selected at a time. So, if we select some polygons by holding down the Shift key, we can extrude them all at the same time. Now, let's see what happens if we try to extrude an entire loop at once. Then I will select an entire loop here from the sphere by holding down the Alt key and clicking next to one of the vertical edges of one of these polygons. And now I will click on the edge icon of the extrude and drag. As we can see, the result is a bit strange, because all of the polygons are extruded in the same direction. Then I will undo the command using the Ctrl-Z shortcut. And I will now show some variations of the extrude that are useful for this type of situation. To access these variations, we will click on the Extrude Region button here in the toolbar and keep the button pressed. As we can see, there are some variations of the Extrude tool here, and the ones that will be interesting for this situation are the Extrude Along Normals and Extrude Individual. I will start by activating the Extrude Along Normals. With these two active, we will see that if we click and drag, each face will be extruded in the direction of its own normal. And if we switch to Extrude Individual and we click and drag, we will see that each polygon will be extruded individually, separated from the adjacent polygons. Now let's take a look at the Inset Faces tool, which we activate just below the Extrude tool. When this tool is active, we can select one or more polygons and click and drag. This will reduce the original polygons and create a group of polygons by connecting the original polygons to the rest of the geometry. And if we want the insets to occur individually for each polygon, right after using the command, we can open the Properties panel down here and mark the Individual option. This will cause the inset to be performed individually for each selected polygon. And finally, let's take a look at the Bevel tool, which we activated right below the Inset tool here in the toolbar. To use this tool, I will activate the Edge Selection mode up here. And now, I will select one of those edges of one of those corners that we created with the Extrude. And if you have the Bevel tool active and click and drag, we will see that this tool splits the original edge in two, creating a chamfer on the selected edge. We can also select an entire set of edges and use the command. Also, we can open the Properties panel down here and set some parameters like size and the number of segments. And then that's it. These are basic tools, but they are among the most important tools of polygonal modeling softwares. In this lesson, we are going to start to model the airplane of our final project. And for this, I'm going to start by deleting all these initial objects from the scene. So I can press the A shortcut key to select all the objects and press the delete key to delete all of them. And now, to start the creation of the body of the airplane, I'm going to create a cylinder, because it's a very similar form to the body of the airplane. So I can press the Shift-A shortcut and click on Mesh Cylinder. And now, just after creating the cylinder, I'm going to edit the count of segments around the cylinder so that the airplane is very low poly, with a very low count of polygons, okay? So, just after creating the cylinder, I can come here in the Properties panel and edit the Vertices field, okay? So, in this Vertices field, I'm going to reduce the poly count to 8. With 8 segments, we have a nice round shape, but with a very low poly look. And now I'm going to rotate the cylinder to the horizontal position, okay? The idea here is to rotate the object so that the front part and the back parts are aligned to the y-axis, and the sides of the object will be aligned to the x-axis of the view. If we model the object this way, it will facilitate the use of several tools related to symmetry and mirroring of the object, okay? The front part of the 3D view in Blender corresponds to this green ball right here in the navigation icon. Okay, so if we click this little ball, we will see right up here in the left that we are in the front orthographic view. And if we click in this other ball back here with the Y, we will see that we go to the back orthographic view, okay? And when we click on any of these red balls of the X-axis, we will see that we go to a side view. So, as I want the front part to be aligned with the Y-Y, I'm going to activate the rotation tool, and instead of rotating on the Y-axis, I'm going to rotate it in the X-axis. So, after activating the rotation tool, I will click on this red arc of the rotation manipulation icon. And now, to make sure that I rotate precisely 90 degrees, before I click on the arc and rotate, I'm going to hold the Ctrl key and then I will click on the arc and rotate. With that, we make sure that the object rotates with an interval of 5 degrees. And we can see the angle that the object is by looking at this number here in the upper left corner of the 3D view. So, to rotate the object precisely with 90 degrees, we just have to hold the Ctrl key and rotate the object with the chosen axis until this value here comes to 90 or minus 90 degrees, okay? This way we make sure that the object is precisely in the horizontal position. And now we can enter the edit mode of the object so that we can model the airplane. To do this, I'm going to click here in the interaction mode menu in the upper left corner of the 3D view and click on the edit mode. The first thing I'm going to do is to adjust the proportion of the cylinder. To do this, I can click on this red ball here to position the 3D view in the side view, okay? And now I can select all the components and using the scale command that we find here in the toolbar, we can actually click on the right side of the toolbar and drag if we want to see the names of the tools. And here I'm going to activate the scale command, the scale tool. And now, if I click on the Y-axis of the tool, I can scale it a bit. The proportion that I'm going to use is more or less the double on the horizontal axis that it is on the vertical axis, okay? You don't have to use the same proportions that I am using. But if you want to create a model similar to mine, you can use more or less this proportion that I am using. Now, I'm going to activate the Loop Cut tool here on the toolbar to insert new edges, new loops in the model in a way that I can make it a bit more round, okay? The same way that is the design of our airplane. So, after activating the Loop Cut tool, I'm going to click on any of these horizontal edges of the model, okay? I'm going to start by using just one click. And now, so that I can add more loops, instead of creating all of them one by one, immediately after creating the first loop, I'm going to the Properties panel of the Loop Cut tool here, and I'm going to increase the number of cuts to 5. So just go down here and increase this number of cuts field to 5, okay? And now, with this number of cuts, we'll be already able to manipulate the form to reach the design we want. Now, I'm going to activate the Select Box tool up here. And now I'm going to start to manipulate each loop at a time by selecting it. And for this, I'm going to hold the Alt key and click on any of the vertical edges. And now we can start to scale these loops, or by using the Scale tool here on the toolbar. So we can, with it active, we can click and drag to scale down, or if we keep the Select Box tool active, we can scale the loop. So I'm going to select this one here with the Alt key. We can scale the loop using the S key of the keyboard. The S key of the keyboard activate is the shortcut for the scale command. So if I select another loop and press the S key, I can scale it. Now another one, Alt click to select, S to scale, Alt click to select, S to scale, Alt click to select, S to scale, okay? Because I want to reach this rounded arc, okay, that is smaller back here and a bit bigger up here with this arced form around the body of the object. Now I'm going to start to work on the cabin of the airplane. So this is going to be a round structure in the upper part of this cylinder. And I want the cabin of the airplane to be in the middle of the structure. So to do this, I'm going to select the central edges. So I'm going to select this loop here, and this one, and this one. And I'm going to move them a bit forward so that the cabin is created more to the front of the airplane. So they are going to be created from these polygons here, and so that the cabin is created more to the front, I'm going to move all the loops one by one by selecting the loop with the Alt key and move the loop forward in the Y-axis using the Move tool. So just clicking the loop with the Alt key pressed, and with the Move tool, move the loop a bit forward, like this. Maybe now I can press the S key to scale this loop down a bit, always checking if this profile is arced, is round like the reference. Okay? And now, as I want to create the cabin using these 4 faces up here, I can position the 3D view in a side view by clicking on this red circle, and I'm going to move this front vertex to the front a bit, just a bit with the Move tool, and these back vertices here a bit backwards, like this. Okay, this way, if we check this form from the upper view, we will see that it's a bit more round, more oval at least. So now I can activate the Select Box tool in the toolbar and activate the Face Selection mode up here and select these 4 faces with the Shift key pressed. And now, before extruding the cabin itself, I'm going to activate the Inset Faces tool, and I'm going to click and drag inside a bit to create this small gap between the airplane and the glass. Okay? So we have this small space, and now I can activate the Extrude Region tool and click on the addition icon and drag to create the extrusion. Now I can press the S key to scale this polygon a bit down, or use the Scale tool and click and drag to scale these upper polygons a bit so that the cabin gets this round form. So now we can consider the cabin done, and we can start to work on the wing of the airplane. So I'm going to select these 3 faces here on the side with the Shift key pressed. I'm going to click in all of them. And now I'm going to create this wing only in one side of the plane. Okay, so I'm going to create this first wing only on the left side of the plane, and after we finish the modeling, I'm going to show you a command that we can use to mirror everything we model in one side of the object to the other side. This way, instead of worrying about modeling everything in both sides, we just have to worry with one side, and in the end we mirror everything. Okay, So I will position the 3D view in the side view by clicking the X red circle. And now I'm going to activate the Inset Faces command so that I can click and drag to create this thinner polygon strip that better matches the size of the wing that I want. So now I can activate the Extrude Region tool here in the toolbar and click and drag on the addition icon to start the extrusion process. As the original faces were pointing down, like this, the extrusion will be pointed to this direction. Okay? And that's not exactly what we want. But that's no problem. After the extrusion, we can position the 3D view in the front of the airplane by clicking. I'm just seeing that by accident I created the front of the airplane pointing to the back part of the scene. Okay, so if we take a look here, we will see that it's pointing in the back orthographic view. But that's not a big problem, because the important for us is that the sides of the airplane are aligned with the x-axis of the 3D view. This way, the mirroring tools that we are going to use in the end are going to work properly. So now I can select the Move tool and move these polygons of the tip of the wing up a bit. I actually want this to be a bit pointing up a bit, okay? So it has this small inclination. And the size of the wing can be about 2.5 squares of the grid, like 1.5 the size of the body of the airplane. So we can see that the size of the body is 2 squares, and we can create the wing with about 2.5 squares. Okay, something like this. You can tweak the proportions if you want, but I'm going to use this. Now I'm going to select the polygons of the tip of the wing again, and I'm going to adjust in the upper view. I'm going to use the scale tool to make it very straight by scaling it in the x-axis, so it is very straight like this. Now I can select the Move tool and move it forward because I want this front part of the wing to be very straight. I'm actually going to scale it down because I want the tip of the wing to be smaller than the base of the wing. And then I can select the Move tool and move it to the front again. Now I think that I'm going to activate the scale tool once more and scale these polygons on the z-axis to make the tip of the wing a bit thinner. And I think that this way it's fine. And now we can start to work on the shape of the wing so it gets round in the back part, okay, like this. Like were the wings of this kind of plane, this old plane. So I need to select these vertices or the edges of the tips of the wing. So I can activate the edge selection mode up here. I'm going to activate the Move tool, and I need to select only the edge of the corner of the wing and move it a bit to the center, so that we can start to have this round shape in the tips of the wing, like this. And now, so that we can make the center part of the wing also a bit round, here in the back part, I need to create some segments in the middle of the wing. Okay, and for this I'm going to use the Loop Cut tool. Let me finish some adjustments here. Okay, but now I'm going to use the Loop Cut tool and create some segments in the middle of the wing so that I can adjust the edges and make this shape look round like this. Okay, so I'm going here in the toolbar and I'm going to activate the Loop Cut tool, and I'm going to click on one of these edges. Let me drag it to the tip a bit like this. This one I'm going to let here, almost in the tip. And I'm going to select the scale tool and scale it on the x-axis so that it gets straight like this. Okay? Now I'm going to activate the loop cut tool again and insert one more loop. And this time it is already straight. So I can now that I have those segments, I can activate the move tool, select that edge in the back of the wing and move back a bit. And the other one that I just created, select only the vertical edge and move it back a bit. The point here is to make that back part of the wing look round, okay? Because those old planes had this back part round like this. This is kind of a Second World War airplane, okay? Now I can just make some small adjustments by moving these edges to a good position. We need to make some tests. And I think that that's it for the wing. Now I can start to work on the wings, on the back wings, those in the back part of the airplane, and in that vertical wing that we have back here. So I'm going to start with the back horizontal wings that are going to come down from these two polygons over here. So with the face selection mode active, I'm going to select these two faces and I'm going to activate the inset faces command and click and drag to create a small inset. And now I'm going to adjust these polygons before I extrude the back wing, okay? So I need to make this selection straight, near to the shape that I want the wing to have. So I'm going to activate the move tool and activate the vertex selection mode up here, okay? And now by moving those vertices, I'm going to adjust this shape so that it's more like a rectangle, a flat rectangle, okay? So I can start by selecting these vertex in the upper part that are going up and move them down so that this selection is more straight. Maybe I can select those front vertex and move them back a bit, those two vertices. Move them back a bit on the y-axis. Okay, that wing is not too big. And looking from the side, this is almost there. But if we take a look in this shape by looking on other angles, so if I rotate the 3D view now, we will see that the position of these vertices will be kind of messy because we just moved them on the y-axis, and so that those vertices are perfectly aligned to the shape, to the polygon that was there before, that was an inclined face, we need to adjust those vertices on the x-axis as well. Okay, so after adjusting them in the horizontal axis, we need to make sure that those vertices are aligned in the shape by moving them in the x-axis. Okay, so I'm going to move them here by rotating the 3D view and checking all the angles as possible. And now I believe that I have a good pair of polygons here so that I can extrude my rear wing. Okay, so now I can activate the face selection mode again, select those two faces we just adjusted, and activate the extrude region tool and extrude these faces like this. As we have seen, the extrusion will follow the alignment of the original faces, so it's not going to be a good angle at the beginning, but we can adjust it by using the move tool, so we can get it straight on the x-axis like this, maybe pointing a bit backward. We can use the scale tool to make it flat on the x-axis like this, and make it thinner on the y-axis by scaling it down like this. Maybe we can move it backwards a bit to make it more aerodynamic. Maybe we need to do some adjustments in the tip, so we can scale it down to make the tip thinner like this. Well, if we looked from the front of the airplane by pressing the y-axis, the navigation icon, we can see that the inclination of those wings are very different. So maybe we can move the back wing down a bit so that the inclination of the two wings matches a bit more. Okay, something like this. And now we can start to work on the shape of this back wing. I want to make it a bit round in the front part. So I'm going to activate the loop cut tool here in the toolbar, and I'm going to click on one of these edges to insert a new loop. And to make it straight, I'm going to activate the scale tool and scale it on the x-axis, okay? And now I can adjust it, and I think that I will, let me see, I will move it here to the center, and I'm going to insert a new loop with the loop cut tool, okay? And now we can move those edges again to the front so that we can make this round shape, okay? And we can do as we did in the front wing, that we select these vertical edges, and with the move tool we moved them back and forward to adjust the shape. Or we can make this adjustment by using the vertex selection mode. But so that I can make sure that looking from the top view, I select both vertices, the one from the top and the one that is below, back there, I need to activate the transparent mode, the X-ray mode, by clicking on this button over here, okay? When this button is selected, whenever I create a selection window, everything that is inside this selection window is selected, even if it's behind the geometry that I am seeing, okay? So I'm going to activate the vertex selection mode, and with this X-ray button active and the select box tool active, okay, I can create a window, and I am sure this way that the vertex that I am seeing and the vertex that is down there, both of them are selected, okay? So looking from the top view, if I do not have this vertex, this X-ray mode selected, the bottom vertex will not be selected. But if I activate the X-ray mode and I create a selection window, I can be sure that the bottom vertex is selected. So I can make a selection this way, okay? And using the move tool, I can move those vertices forward to make this shape round, okay? So using the vertex selection mode, I can create windows and select this group of vertices, these groups of vertices, and adjust the shape of the wing so that it's kind of round like this. Very nice. Now I can turn off the X-ray mode, because when we have it active, it can make the visualization of the model a bit confusing. So after using it, we can disable it right here in the button, okay? I think that I need to make some adjustments here, moving these vertices down a bit to make this wing more straight. I think that's okay. And now I can start to create the fin of the airplane, that back fin that we have up here. So I will activate the face selection mode, and I can activate the select box tool and select these 4 faces back here. Then I will activate the inset command and click and drag to create a new group of polygons, but I will not drag so much that it creates this messy cross down here. So I will just click and drag and make sure that it's not too much to make this back part nice and clean. Now I can adjust this shape so that it's thinner and rectangular. So to do this, I can activate the vertex selection mode and select these 2 vertices up here. And using the scale tool, I can scale these 2 vertices on the x-axis. I will also move them back a bit with the move tool. Now I will do the same with these 2 central vertices down here. Select them, and with the scale tool I will scale them down to make this shape rectangular. Looking from the top, this shape is nice, but if we rotate the view, we will see that this form is a bit strange. Okay, so what I need to do to make things right here is to activate the move tool and move those pairs of vertices by selecting both and moving them up a bit so that the shape is straight as the original faces. Okay, so I will also select these 2 vertices here in the center with the shift key and move them up a bit, and I will also do it back here to make these new faces that we created with the inset tool nice. Maybe I can move these 3 vertices back a bit so that the fin goes all the way back there. And now we are ready to extrude those faces. So I can activate the face selection mode up here and select these 4 faces and activate the extrude region command. And now I will click and drag on the edge icon to create the extrusion. And now, looking from the side, I can start to adjust the form of the fin. Maybe I can start by scaling it on the y-axis to make it thinner and smaller on the top, and scaling it down on the z-axis. Now I can move it until I find the right shape. Maybe scale it even more a bit, so let me activate the scale command and make it smaller on both the y and z axis. Okay, and now as we created these extra edges in the wings, I'm going to create some extra edges with the loop tool here in the fin, so that we can work on the shape of the fin to make it a bit more round. So after using the loop cut, I'm going to add another segment here in the number of cuts. Okay. And now with these new loops, we can start to work on the shape to make the front of the fin more round, if we want. So to do this, I will activate the select box tool to select the vertices from both sides, and activate the vertex selection mode. And I need to activate the X-ray mode so that I am sure that when I select things from one side, the vertex on the other side are also selected. Okay? So now I can create a selection window to select these vertices here and move them forward a bit on the y-axis. Now let me select those vertices here and move them forward a bit on the y-axis. And now I can repeat this process until I find the shape that I want. Now I can move these 4 vertices back a bit to make this front part very round. Maybe I can move those vertices here to the center and make them straight. And what we are seeing here now is a perfect example of the kind of adjustment that we have to do when we are doing polygonal modeling. Okay? This process needs a lot of adjustments. So we need to select vertices, move, adjust. Select vertices, move, adjust all the time. Okay? And now I can disable the X-ray mode because we finished the modeling of this side of the airplane. So what we are going to do now is to mirror everything we model on the left side of the airplane to the other side. And so that we can mirror a part of a model into the other side, we need to have it selected. So in this case, as we want to mirror everything, we need to select all the components of the model. It doesn't make any difference if it is in the vertex selection mode, edge or faces. Okay? We just have to select everything in any selection mode. So we can press the A key to select all the components of the model. Then we go to the Mesh menu up here, and we are going to click on the Symmetrize command. Okay? Mesh, Symmetrize. When we do this, Blender will mirror everything from one side to the other. But we need to pay attention in this panel down here because Blender will not guess by itself which side and which axis you want it to mirror. By default, it mirrors the negative x to the positive x, and in this case it was correct. But if by chance you modeled your object in a different axis or modeled the thing that you want to mirror in the other side, you might want to change the direction here in the Symmetrize menu. So in other situations, it will be very important that you understand how this menu here works. Okay? So for example, I want to mirror everything that is back here in the model to the front. I will need to change in the menu here the axis and the orientation of the Symmetrize. So maybe we need to do some tests here until we find that in this case the correct answer is -z to +z. Okay? Generally, I like to model my objects using the x-axis to the sides because it's the default for mirroring tools in Blender. So I'm going to leave it here as -x to +x, as we have seen that it's the right direction for this object. But if by chance the elements that you want to mirror are in the other side, you just need to flip the direction and keep the axis here in the Symmetrize menu. So for example, +x to -x. But in our case, it was -x to +x. Okay? So just remember that after using the Symmetrize command, maybe you need to check this field here. Okay? And now, to finalize this lesson, I'm going to create a chamfer and a hole here in the front of the airplane so that we can add in another lesson the helix of the airplane here in the front. Okay? So I will start by creating a chamfer in this front part, and for this I will activate the edge selection mode and select this loop here with the Alt tool, Alt key, and with the Shift key pressed, I will need to click on the other side to select the complete loop. And I needed to do this because I have this edge here in the center. Okay? So after selecting the entire loop, I will activate the bevel command here in the toolbar, and I will click and drag to create this chamfer. Okay? Remember that you can adjust the size of the chamfer by going here in the panel. Okay, so you can open the panel and adjust the width, the size of the chamfer here. I think that this size will be nice. And now I can create the hole from where the helix will come out. So I will activate the face selection mode, select these two front faces here, and I will activate the inset faces tool and click and drag to create a small inset like this. And now I can activate the extrude region tool and click and drag to create an internal extrusion like this. Okay? And with that, I can leave the edit mode by going back to the object menu up here. And with this, we can consider the modeling done. In this lesson, we are going to model the helix of our plane, okay? And for this, I'm also going to start by creating a simple cylinder. So I can use the Shift-A shortcut, and in the Mesh submenu, I'm going to click on Cylinder. As we can see now, as my 3D cursor was in the center of the scene when I created the cylinder itself was created precisely in the center of the scene. But don't worry, because we are going to position it in the right place in a few moments. And now, just after the creation of the cylinder, we are going to set up the number of sides here in the Properties panel. And so that it matches the design of the airplane, I'm also going to set the number of sides of this cylinder to 8. Just remember that to use this Properties panel, you have to do it just after the creation of the object. Okay? So now we can activate the Move tool up here in the toolbar and move the cylinder in the Y-axis to the front of the airplane. Okay? I'm going to move it a bit further so we can have this space between them. Now I need to rotate the cylinder so it gets in the horizontal position, and to this I'm going to activate the rotation tool, and I'm going to click on the red axis with the Ctrl key pressed so that I can rotate the cylinder with the interval of 5 degrees. This way I can pay attention to this number in the upper left corner of the 3D view and stop rotating when it reaches more or minus 90 degrees. So now I have this new cylinder perfectly aligned with the Y-axis of the airplane, because I created it in the same position of the airplane. But it might happen that for any reason, one of these objects is not in the center of the scene. And for this project, it's very important that this new cylinder is perfectly aligned with the center of the whole of the airplane. And for us to do that, I'm going to show you a way that we can use to align any object to any selection of any other object. And to exemplify, I'm even going to select the cylinder and move it a bit up and a bit to the side so that I can show you how this alignment works. Okay? And now, to start the alignment, we are going to select the target object, which is the airplane, and we are going to enter the edit mode by going up here to the interaction mode menu. Okay? And we are going to use the vertex selection mode. Okay? So up here in this region, we are going to click and activate the vertex selection mode. Okay? It needs to be the vertex selection mode. Now we need to select all these vertices inside this hole. Okay? we need to select the vertex that will be the target of the alignment. So we are going to select all of them, and when we are in the vertex selection mode, okay, and with any selection done, we can right click anywhere in the 3D view to open this context menu, and here we are going to use this snap vertices submenu, and here we are going to use this cursor to selected command. This command will bring the 3D cursor precisely to the center of this selection, okay? And now that the 3D cursor is precisely in the center of the selection, we can exit the edit mode by going back to the interaction mode menu and clicking on object mode, okay? Now we can select the Helix object, the cylinder that we just created, and to align the cylinder to the 3D cursor, we are going to click on with the right mouse button, and we are going to the snap menu, and here we find the selection to cursor command, okay? This command will move the selected object precisely to the position of the 3D cursor. So to summarize, we needed to use two commands. We needed to use the cursor to selected command inside the edit mode, and then we select the other object and use the selected cursor command to move the object to the 3D cursor. This way we can be sure that the object that we just created is precisely aligned with the center of the airplane, okay? And now we can start to work on the modeling of the Helix. To do this, we can enter the edit mode up here, and I'm going to start by matching the scale with the size that I want. So I'm going to activate the scale tool, and I'm going to click and drag down a bit more until it is a bit smaller than the original hull of the airplane. And now we can start to use the modeling tools of the edit mode so that we can shape this object to that round form of the point of the helixes of this kind of airplane, okay? To do this, I'm going to activate the face selection mode up here, and I'm going to activate the extrude tool, extrude region tool, and I'm going to select only this face in the front of the cylinder, and now I can click on this icon and drag a bit to the front, just like this, just a bit like this, okay? Now I can activate the scale tool and scale down it just a bit. For this first loop, we are going to scale just a bit, okay? Don't scale it too much like this. We are going to do it in the next loops. So now I can activate the extrude region again, create a new extrude, and now to create that round form, I'm also going to activate the scale tool again and click and drag down a bit, like this. Now I'm going to activate the extrude again, create one last extrusion and scale it down, this time a bit more, so that it gets with this point look that we have in the helixes of this kind of airplane. And now I can actually start to work on the blades of the helixes, okay, that go out from this center part to the sides. So I can activate the select box tool, and I'm going to select these two faces up here with the shift key pressed, and keeping the shift key pressed, I'm going to select these two faces on the other side, okay? Now I can use the inset faces tool down here, and I'm going to click and drag down to create this narrow shape with these faces. Now I can activate the extrude along normals tool by keeping the extrude button pressed. I'm going to activate the extrude along normals tool, and I'm going to click and drag until it reaches more or less this size here, okay? But as we can see, it got too big in the z-axis. So to correct this, we can select the scale tool in the toolbar. Okay, so I can start by selecting the scale tool, and I'm going to scale it down in the z-axis, just like this. And I can also scale it on the y-axis, so it gets thinner in the point. Now I can activate the move tool and move these polygons back a bit in the y-axis until it reaches more or less this shape that we are seeing. And now, before we move on the creation of the details of the helices, we are going to twist a bit the point of these blades precisely to reach that helix shape of the object. So I'm going to activate the select box. I'm going to clear the selection clicking anywhere on the 3D view, and I'm going to select only the two faces of one of the sides of one of the blades, okay? I'm going to keep the other clear. Now I can click on this red ball to position the 3D view in one of the sides. I'm going to activate the rotate tool, and I'm going to click in the red axis and rotate it with the Ctrl key pressed, so it rotates with the interval of 5 degrees. For this case, I'm going to rotate it 30 degrees, okay? Just to remember and repeat the same angle on the other side. So I'm here, I'm rotating it counterclockwise, and in the other blade of the other side, I'm going to select those two polygons over there. Now I can position the 3D view in this side by clicking on this red circle with the X. And now I'm going to click and drag the X-axis again with the Ctrl key pressed, and I'm also going to pay attention to use 30 degrees, okay? So now we have the points of the helix twisted, and now it is with the shape of a real helix, okay? And now we can start to create that drop shape that we have in the helices that grows a bit and then shrinks in the two sides. And to do this, we are going to use the loop cut command. So I can activate here in the toolbar, and I can click in one of the helices and increase the number of cuts to 2 here in the properties panel. And now I can repeat the procedure in the other side by clicking and increasing the number of cuts. And with this, we have 2 loops in each side, in each blade, okay? Now we can select all of them with the Shift key pressed and scale it a bit on the Z-axis, okay? And with this, we reach this drop look in the blades, okay? And with this, I believe that we can consider the modeling of the helix done. So I can leave the edit mode now by going to the interaction mode menu and going back to the object mode, and that's it. In this lesson, we are going to see how to create and apply materials to the objects. So I have here the file with the airplane we finished modeling in the last lessons, and I'm going to create and apply materials using this tab of the Properties editor right here, this one with this red ball icon. If you want, you can even click on this division line and drag to make this column a bit larger. Very well. For us to create a new material to the scene, we are going to click on this new button right here. The idea is that we do that when we have the object in which we want to add the material already selected. This way, the material that we create will be already assigned to the object. So I will make sure the object is selected, and I'm going to click on this new button. If we want now, we can name the material by clicking on this field here, And for this example, I'm going to create a blue material, so I will rename it as blue. When we do this, we can see that the name also changes in this icon up here. This is the slots window, and I'm going to talk about it in a few moments. If we have the material selected and take a look down here, we will see several parameters that we can edit to change the look of the material. In this crash course, we are just going to talk about the base color of the material, that is the color itself. So, if we click on this field here, besides the name, where we can see this color wheel, where we can choose the hue of the color and the saturation, and this column here in the right, where we can choose the darkness of the color. But as we can see right now, what's happening is that we are changing the color of the material here in the properties of the material. We can see the color here in this icon, but if we take a look in the object here in the 3D view, we can see that the object is not properly displaying the material. And this is happening because the 3D view of Blender have 4 different visualization modes that we can choose in the upper right corner of the 3D view in these 4 buttons over here. This first button here activates the wireframe mode that displays the edges of the object without showing the faces. The second buttons display the object in the solid mode, that is the lightest mode to see the object, and that's why we use this mode to model the object. And then we have these last 2 modes, that is the look dev mode or the material preview, this one here, where we can properly see the material applied to the object, and the last one is the render preview, that I'm going to talk a bit more in a future lesson, okay? So that we can see the material in the 3D view, we must use for now the material preview mode in this button here. So we can see that when we have the look dev or material preview mode active, any change we do in the material here in the properties editor, we will see in real time happening in the 3D view. So if we change the color, we can see that the color also changes in the 3D view. So for this project, I'm going to choose a dark shade of blue, but you can choose any color you like for your project. Okay, and we can see that the material is properly displayed in the object in the 3D view. And now that we finished creating our first material, we are going to see how we can add different materials to a single object. Okay? So let's say now that I want to create another material to add in different polygons of this object. How we can do that in Blender? Well, when we are in the Material tab of the Properties editor, we can see this window here that enables us to create multiple materials for a single object. And these materials are listed here in this window, and we can create a new slot to put a new material by clicking on this plus icon here in the right side of the window. When we do this, Blender creates a new slot so that we can add a new material. It does not create the material itself, okay? So if we click in the material, we will see down here the properties of the material, and if I click on this empty slot, we will see nothing because we didn't add any material to this slot yet. But if I have this slot active and click on this new button down here, we will create a new material to this slot. We can now rename this material the way we want, and I'm going to name it as yellow because this material will be yellow. And I'm going to change the color here in the base color parameter. So I will choose here a nice shade of yellow. Okay. We can see that the icon here is already yellow. But now we have to add this material to the parts of the object that we want it to be. And how we can do this in Blender? To do this in Blender, we need to enter the edit mode of the objects by going to the interaction mode menu here. And now we need to select the faces in which we want this material to be. Okay? So I'm going to have the yellow material selected here in the right. And then when I have the polygon selected, I will click on the Assign button. So I'm going to start selecting the faces by activating the selection box tool here in the toolbar. And I can click on this icon here, the X-ray button, so that we can see the object in the transparency mode and we can select the components of the other side. For this, it's better that I activate the face selection mode so that I can select the polygons properly. Okay, now I'm going to select the faces in the points of the wings, okay, in the tip of the wings. I'm also going to select the faces in the tip of these back wings, okay, and also I'm going to select these up polygons back here. And when I have all these faces properly selected, I can make sure that the material I want to add is active here in the slots menu, and I'm going to click on the Assign button down here. When I do this, the material that is active is properly assigned to these faces. And now I can repeat this procedure with other materials. So now I want to create a red material to put here in the front part of the airplane. So I can start by clicking on the Add icon here in the right to create a new slot. Okay, this new empty slot. Now I'm going to create a new material by clicking on the New button, and I'm going to rename it as Red. So I'm going to rename it as Red here. Now I can set the color here in the base color parameter. I'm going to choose here a nice shade of red. And to assign this material to the polygons that I want, I need to select these polygons. So I can use the select box tool to select all these front faces here. And now I just have to make sure that the red material is active here, and I'm going to click on Assign. Okay? If by chance you have a different material assigned to a polygon that you did not intend to, you just have to click the polygon and assign the material that you want to be there. Okay, so for this example, I'm going to assign the blue material again to that polygon. And to finish now, I'm going to create the material to the cabin, to this glass of the cabin of the airplane. And I'm going to create a dark gray material to put here. Okay, so I can click on this Add icon to create a new slot. I'm going to click on the New button to create a new material, and I'm going to rename this material as Gray. Okay, now I can change the color here in the base color parameter to a dark gray. Just move this down here in this column. Now I will select the polygons corresponding to the cabin. I can select this loop with the Alt key, and then with the Shift key pressed, I can select these faces up here. Okay, I can leave the transparency mode now. And to assign the material to these polygons, I just have to make sure it is selected here in the window and click on the Assign button down here. Okay? If we leave the edit mode now, we can see that all the materials are properly added to the object. Now that the materials of the airplane are complete, we can create materials to the Helix. And if we want, we can create new materials to this object, or we could select the existing materials that we already created and apply it to this object. As we can see here in the Properties editor, if I have an object with no material applied and have the Material tab selected, we will see no material in this window. If I select an object with materials, we will see the materials there. If I select the Helix now and take a look at this menu here, we can see all the materials that we have already created to the scene. And here we will see that if we click on any of these materials, we will see that this material will be applied to the entire object. So for this case, I'm going to select first the gray material so that it is applied to the entire object. But I also want to add the yellow material to the tips of the helix. Okay? So we have already seen that to do this, we need to create a new slot so that the object can have multiple materials. And in this new slot, we could choose an existing material or create a new material to apply to the polygons that we want. For this case, I'm going to use the same yellow that I already used for the tips of the wings. So with this material slot selected, I'm going to select the yellow material here. And now, so that I can apply it properly to the polygons of the tips of the helix, I'm going to make sure that the helix is selected, and I'm going to activate the edit mode up here. Okay? Now I will activate the X-ray mode, and with the selection box tool, I will select the polygons of the tips of the wings of the helix. Okay, and now if I make sure that the yellow slot is selected, active, I can click on the assign button to assign this material to those faces. Now I can add this red material that I have already created for the airplane. I'm going to add it to the point of the helix. To select it, I can start by selecting this face here, and I can expand this selection by using the Ctrl+ key, but it have to be the plus key of the numeric keypad, okay? So if you have Ctrl+, you expand the selection. If you do not have the numeric keypad, you can go to the Select menu and click on Select More Less and click on More. This way it will expand the selection. But if you have the numeric keypad, you can just click Ctrl+ to expand the selection. Of course that, if you prefer, you can also select these faces using the Select Box window normally, okay? Now we can add a new slot here in the Material tab of the Properties editor, and with this slot selected, we can activate the red material right here. And if we click Assign, as the faces were selected, this material will be assigned to these faces. We can now disable the X-ray mode and leave the edit mode of the object so that we can see all the materials properly assigned to the project. Okay? This way we finish the material creation. And welcome back. In this lesson, we will see how to use the parent command to attach the propeller to the plane. When we have two or more separate objects in the scene, we can connect them by using the parent command. When we do this, we create a hierarchy where one object is the parent object and the other object is the child object. In this hierarchy, all transformations we make with the parent object will also affect the child object. But what we do with the child object will not affect the parent object. To define the hierarchy and use the command, we will first select the object that will be the child and, with the Shift key pressed, add the object that will be the parent to the selection. Then, just right-click to open the context menu and click on Parent, Object. When we do this, we define a hierarchy where the last selected object is the parent and the first selected object is the child. That way, if we select the parent object and move, rotate, or scale, we will see that all the transforms will affect the child object. However, if we select the child object and use the transformation tools, we will see that the parent object will not be affected. Now, let's do this to the scene of our plane. But first, I will ask you to activate the rotation tool here in the toolbar, select the propeller and rotate it on the y-axis. If it's spinning from its central axis, it's alright. But if by chance it's spinning from a point that is not in the middle of the propeller, you may have done something different during the modeling process that left the object's pivot a little off axis. This is not a big problem. If this is happening, use Ctrl-Z to undo the rotation and return the helix to the starting point. And then right-click to open the context menu, click on Set Origin, Origin to Geometry. This command will make the object's pivot be positioned exactly in its center. So, if you rotate the object now, you will probably see that the propeller will be rotating correctly. And then we can already use the parent command to connect the propeller to the plane. So, just select the propeller first, and while holding down the Shift key, select the plane. Now, just right-click, click on Parent, Object. And with that, the connection is made, and the transformations we make with the plane will affect the propeller. And the transformations we make with the propeller will not affect the plane. And with that, our plane is ready for animation. Before we create the animation of the airplane project, we will make in this lesson a brief presentation of the animation process with Blender. We call animations the movies generated with techniques that create the illusion of movement, such as stop motion, traditional animation, and digital animation. As in a conventional movie, an animated movie consists of a sequence of images that, when played back at a certain speed, create the illusion of movement. Each image of a conventional movie or animation is called a frame. An animation can be made with different frame rates per second, but a widely used rate is 24 FPS. This means that for every second of animation, the video displays 24 images. So, in order to create 1 second of animation using the traditional animation technique, the animator usually needs to create 24 different drawings. In digital animation, we can use a feature called keyframe. A keyframe is a special type of frame that stores the properties of the element being animated at any given time. And when 2 keyframes are created at different moments of time with different values for these properties, the computer is able to interpolate the difference between them generating the animation automatically. Now let's see how to create a simple animation in Blender. To create a keyframe for a particular object, first we must have it selected. And then we can go to the Object menu, Animation, Insert Keyframe. When we do that, we will see a menu where we can choose which properties we want to generate the keyframe for. If I want to make an animation where the cube just moves, I have to create a location type keyframe. If I want an animation with it rotating, I have to create a rotation type keyframe. If I want to create an animation where it changes size, I will create a scale keyframe. In this case, I'm going to make an animation where the cube moves and rotates. And for this, I will create a keyframe of the lock hot type, which will simultaneously generate position and rotation keyframes. When we do this and have the object selected in the 3D view, we can see here in the timeline this diamond in the frame where this blue line is. This diamond is exactly the keyframe we just generated. And that blue line is the playhead. When we move the playhead, we define in which frame the animation is in. Now that I created the first animation keyframe in frame 1, I will click and drag to position the playhead in another frame. It could be here in frame 100, for example. Now, I will activate the Transform tool here in the toolbar, and I will move and rotate the cube a bit. And for Blender to generate a keyframe and save these transformations in this frame, I will generate a new keyframe for the object. We have seen that we can do this by going to the Object menu, Animation, Insert Keyframe. But we can also open this menu to insert keyframes by simply pressing the I key on the keyboard. And here I will once again click on the Lock Hot option. If we look at the timeline now, we will see that a new keyframe was created exactly in the frame where we left the playhead. And if I press this button to return the playhead to the beginning and hit the play button, we can see the animation working. In this lesson, we will use the commands and principles we saw in the last lesson to create a simple animation of our plane flying. We are going to create this animation with the plane going up and down and spinning slightly to one side and to the other. In addition, we will animate the propeller so that it's constantly rotating like this. And as we already parented the propeller to the plane in the parent lesson, when we animate the plane, the propeller will move with it automatically. Then we can start the animation planning by setting its total duration. We will make this video with 10 seconds. And as we have seen, at first Blender uses a rate of 24 frames for every second of animation. So, for us to have a 10-second video, we need our animation to have a total of 240 frames. If we look at this right part of the timeline header, we will see that there are two fields where we can determine in which frame the animation starts and in which frame the animation ends. So, for the animation to have 10 seconds, just type 240 in this end field here. Now we can start creating the animation of the objects. Let's start by creating the propeller animation. So that the propeller rotates throughout the animation, it will have a keyframe on frame 1, marking the beginning of the animation, and a keyframe on frame 240, marking the end of the animation. So, I will take advantage that the playhead is already here in frame 1, and I will select the propeller here in the 3D view, and I will hit the I shortcut key to open the keyframe creation menu, and I will insert a rotation type keyframe. If we look here in the timeline, we will see that a keyframe has already been created in frame 1. Now I will click and drag the playhead to frame 240. And I will rotate the propeller enough so that its animation looks pretty fast in the final video. In this kind of situation, it's usually necessary that you test different values until you reach a satisfactory result. I've done some previous tests and found that about 50 turns of the propeller during this time interval creates a quick and interesting effect for this animation. That's 5 turns per second, which already makes the propeller animation very fast. But how can we rotate 50 turns accurately? We already saw that we can rotate the objects using the Rotate tool here from the toolbar. But there is a way that we can use to transform the objects directly by numerical values. If we click this little arrow here in the upper right corner of the 3D view, or use the N shortcut key, we open and close this panel bar called Sidebar. And here, in the Item tab, we find the transformation values for location, rotation, and scale. And we can see that we can click and drag to transform each axis separately here by numerical values. And as we can see, the propeller rotation axis in this case is the y-axis. These rotation values here in the sidebar are in degrees. As we want to set 50 turns in this keyframe, we need to multiply 50, which is the number of turns, by 360, which is the number of degrees per turn. And that's 18,000 degrees. So, if we type 18,000 here, put the cursor over the 3D view, press the I key, and click on Rotation, we will create the final rotation keyframe for the propeller. And if we click the play button, we will see that the animation is already working. However, if we look, we will see that the rotation accelerates at the beginning of the animation and slightly slows at the end of the animation. This is because, at first, Blender Transform animation keyframes are all created with acceleration and deceleration to make animations smoother. But in some cases like this, we will want the animation to be at constant speed. That means without acceleration and deceleration. And for us to change this property of the keyframes, we just have to select both of them here in the timeline, right-click over the timeline, and here in the Interpolation Mode submenu, we click on the Linear option. This option will remove the acceleration and deceleration of the keyframes and make the animation speed constant between them. What we can already observe if we click the play button again. Alright, now that we have the propeller animated, let's start animating the plane. During the animation, I want the plane to go down and up twice over 10 seconds. And I want it to slightly tilt to one side when it's going down and slightly tilt to the other side when it's going up. We can start by creating the up and down keyframes, and then we create the rotation keyframes. But as we will animate the plane in both position transformation and rotation transformation, we will always use the lock-hot type keyframe, which stores simultaneously the position and rotation values. So, I will start by putting the plane up a little bit with the Move tool. Then, I will make sure that the playhead is in the frame 0 of the timeline, and I will generate a lock-hot keyframe for it by clicking the I key and by clicking Lock-Hot. Now, I will position the playhead on frame 60 to set the keyframe where the plane is down. I have already tested all these time intervals and saw that they result in a nice timing. But when you are doing an animation for the first time, it's important to test different time intervals until the animation looks the way you want. Now, with the playhead on frame 60, I'm going to move the plane down a bit, and I will generate another keyframe of the lock-hot type. And if we hit play now, we will see that it's already going down. Now, if we want the plane to go up one more time to complete the cycle, we can duplicate the initial keyframe where the plane is up. To do this, we can select the first keyframe and, with the cursor over the timeline, use the Ctrl+C shortcut to copy, and we can paste it with the Ctrl+V shortcut. But before pasting, let's position the playhead on the frame we want it to be pasted into. As we gave a 60 frame interval from the first to the second keyframe, I will position the playhead at frame 120 to keep the 60 frame interval. And now I will press Ctrl+V to paste the keyframe that I copied. If we click play now, we will see that the plane is already going down and up. Now let's create the rotation keyframes between the position keyframes. The first rotation keyframe will be in the middle of the descent, that is, here in frame 30. Then I will position the playhead at frame 30. I will activate the rotation tool and rotate the plane slightly on the y-axis. And I will generate a lock-hot keyframe by hitting the I key. Now, I will create the rotation keyframe for the moment the plane is going up. Then, I will position the playhead here at frame 90. I will rotate the plane a little to the other side. And I will generate another keyframe of the lock-hot type. If we click play now, we will see that the first cycle is already working. And then, if we want to repeat this cycle for the other half of the animation, we can select all the keyframes, hit the Ctrl+C shortcut to copy the keyframes, and, with the playhead on top of the frame 120, use the Ctrl+V shortcut to paste the copied keyframes. With this, everything we animated in the first half will be duplicated to the second half. And we can see it if we hit the play button again. And with that, we finish the animation of our plane. In this lesson, we will see how to adjust the light and the camera so that we can create the final video. Let's start with the lighting. As we deleted the default light of the Blender scene at the beginning of the project, we will have to create a new light. And to do that, we just need to go to the Add menu here at the top of the 3D view, or use the Shift-A shortcut and choose a light from the Light submenu. We can choose the point light, which is the simplest. As we have seen, when we create an object, it's created wherever the 3D cursor of the scene is. So, after creating the light, we can reposition it using the Move tool. I will position it just above the plane, a little forward, and a bit to its side. For this scene, it will be a good idea if we leave the light with a good distance from the plane, like this. As we can observe now, although we have already put a light in the scene, we are still not able to observe any changes in the lighting. This is because we have the Material Preview mode active here in the upper right corner of the 3D view. With this mode, we can visualize the materials of the objects, but we cannot visualize the effect of the scene lights. So that we can see the lights of the scene, we will activate the last button, which corresponds to the rendered mode. Now we can see that the 3D view is very dark. This is happening because this light is still too dim for this scene. For us to fix this, we can make sure that the light is selected in the 3D view and click on this tab of the Properties editor with the light bulb icon. Here we will find the properties of the active light. The first thing we need to do is increase its intensity. And we will do this here in the power parameter. We can tweak it by clicking and dragging, or by typing the value we want. As I want to increase this value a lot, I will type some high values to test, like 3000. I think we still can make the light stronger. So I will type 6000. I think it's got a nice value now, but you can test different values and make your light intensity different if you want. Another thing we can do if we want is make the shadow of the light softer. And we do that by increasing its size. Generally, the larger the area of light emission, the softer the shadows. So, to make the shadow softer, we need to increase this radius value here. But if we do that, we will see that the shadow will not change. This is because we need to enable a render property, which is the process of calculating the final image so that the soft shadows work. And to do that, we will click this tab with the icon of the back of a camera, which is the Render tab. Here we will open this Shadow panel, and we will enable the Soft Shadows option. With this, the size of the light will interfere with the softness of the shadow. Then, we can go back to the Light tab here in the Properties editor and tweak the size of the radius until the softening of the shadows is the way we want. Now that the light is already the way I want, I will change the background color of the scene. To do this, we will change the overall color of the scene. And to do that, we will click this tab with the icon of a world here in the Properties editor. And here, inside the Surface panel, we will change this color parameter. We can choose the color we want for the background. And as we can see, besides changing the background color, this color will also interfere a little in the lighting of the scene. I will choose a blue shade of light that is not too saturated. And with that, the lighting is already exactly the way I want. And now I will create the camera to set the final video frame. To create the camera, I will open the Creation menu with the Shift-A shortcut, and I will click on Camera. At first, the camera will be created where the 3D cursor is. We could move the camera freely to a good frame using the transformation tools. But it's much easier to find a frame by freely navigating the 3D view and use a command for the camera to be positioned according to that frame. So, I will choose an angle taking the plane from the front and a bit off the top like this. And now I will put the camera in this frame by going to the View menu, Align View, Align Active Camera to View. This will make the camera to be positioned exactly at the angle that was the 3D view. Eventually, the camera may be a little too close or too far from the subject. But we can make sure that the camera is selected here in the outliner and move it using the G key and dragging the mouse. And we can move the camera back and forth by clicking the G key and then pressing the Z key twice. So, by pressing G, Z, Z, we can move the camera back and forth to adjust the framing. We can even do this with the play button active. And if you happen to use the navigation controls and get out of the camera framing, you can at any time click on this camera icon here in the 3D view to enable the framing again. And with that, we have our scene properly illuminated and framed. In this lesson, we will finally generate the final video of our animation through a process called render. Rendering is the process in which all scene information, such as objects, materials, and lighting, is finally calculated to generate a final image or video. There are two tabs here in the Properties editor that are related to render. The Render tab, which is the one with the icon of the back of a camera, and the Output tab, which is the one with the printer icon. In the Render tab, we configure properties related to quality and visual properties of the rendering process itself. An example of render property that we can enable on this tab is Ambient Occlusion. The ambient occlusion creates this shading at the corner of the surfaces, enhancing the image contrast. Now, here in the Output tab, we will configure the properties of the final file that will be generated, such as dimensions, file type, type of compressions, among other things. If we look here in the dimensions, we will see that by default the rendering is done with the resolution of 1920 by 1080. If you want to render at this size, there is no problem. But if your computer is not very fast, or if you want to test smaller, you can choose a percentage of this size down here. I will put 50%, which means the final video will be rendered with half of these values. Down here, we define the time interval that will be rendered. As this value is already adjusted according to what we set here in the timeline, if we leave it as it is, it will already render the 10 seconds of animation that we want. In addition to these properties of the Dimensions panel, we have to set the properties of the file that will be rendered here in this Output panel. In this button with a folder icon right here at the beginning of the panel, we can define the place and the file name. I will click on Desktop to save the file to my desktop, and I will rename it Airplane Animation up here. Now just click Accept and it will save the file name and location. Now we have to choose what type of file to render in this File Format menu. As we want to save a video, I will click on this FFmpeg video option here at the end. And now, to finish, I will open this encoding subpanel and change the container from Matroska to MPEG-4 here. Now, to render the final video with all these features, just come here in this Render menu, and since we want to render a video and not an image, let's click on Render Animation. When we do this, we will see that Blender will render one image at a time. This process may take a while, depending on the properties of the scene and your computer. And when the process is over, you can go to the address you saved your file and open the video. In my opinion, this video is pretty cool this way, but I will show you something else that will make the video even better. In real life, when we shoot objects that move very fast with a camera, those objects are blurred in the video. The name of this effect is motion blur. Unfortunately, the render that comes enabled by default in Blender currently does not have this property. If we look here in the Render tab, we can see an option called Motion Blur. But this motion blur does not calculate the motion blur of objects, only camera motion. If we look at the top of the Render tab, we will see a menu called Render Engine. This menu has 3 render options, which are internal software we can choose to render. The 2 main ones are Eevee, which is the default render, and Cycles. Each has its advantages and disadvantages. But since Eevee's motion blur does not calculate the motion blur of objects, if we want this effect, we will have to enable Cycles. This render has different features that I explain in more detail in the Learn Blender 2.8 course. But if we look here, we will see that it also has an option called Motion Blur. And this motion blur of Cycles recognizes the motion blur of objects. So, if we enable this option and we have the video rendered again, we will see the plane's propeller blurred as in a real video. The only thing I'm going to do before rendering is to rename the file here in the Output tab. I will click here in the folder, and I will name the file Animation Plane Motion Blur to differentiate the file. Now just click on Accept and click Render, Render Animation again. You will probably notice that rendering with cycles is slower than Eevee. As I said, each render has its advantages and disadvantages. And while cycles has many advantages, rendering time is actually a disadvantage compared to Eevee. But the quality of the final render is often worth it. After the render is complete, you can once again go to the place where you saved your file and open the video. And with that, we conclude our project and our Blender crash course. I really hope you enjoyed the course.